In a Dallas courtroom, Representative Jasmine Crockett faces a biased judge's wrath, fined for her fierce advocacy. Her legal genius shines, sparking a battle that could reshape justice itself. The air in the Dallas courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your breath catch. Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Congress known for her sharp wit and unyielding commitment to her constituents, stood at the defendant's table, her posture defiant but composed. Her dark eyes locked onto Judge Ronald Hargrove, a man whose stern reputation preceded him, his graying hair and furrowed brow giving him the look of someone who hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration. The gallery buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbling furiously, their pens scratching like insects in the silence between exchanges. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a collision of wills, a spark threatening to ignite a firestorm. Crockett was in court because of a heated protest that had spiraled out of control in her district. In early 2025, a controversial Texas law restricting voter access had ignited widespread demonstrations, and Crockett, ever the advocate for her community, had joined the front lines. The protest, meant to be peaceful, turned chaotic when counter-protesters clashed with activists. In the fray, Crockett was accused of inciting disorderly conduct by rallying the crowd with a megaphone, her voice booming over the chaos, urging resilience. The charge was flimsy, a clear attempt to silence a vocal critic of the state's policies, but it landed her here, facing Hargrove's gavel. The judge's voice cut through the room, sharp and condescending. "Ms. Crockett, your behavior at that protest was reckless, unbecoming of a public official. You're fined $5,000 for contempt of court." The fine stemmed from Crockett's refusal to apologize for her actions during the protest, a stance Hargrove deemed insolent. Earlier in the hearing, she'd interrupted his lecture on proper conduct to assert that her presence at the protest was her duty to her constituents, not a crime. Hargrove, unaccustomed to being challenged, had bristled, his face reddening. As he slapped the fine on her, a power play to assert dominance, Crockett didn't flinch. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, the kind that says, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She adjusted her blazer, her movements deliberate, and leaned slightly toward the microphone. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but laced with steel. "Your fine assumes I've done something wrong. I'd like to discuss the precedent for this penalty because I believe it's rooted in a misapplication of the law." The room stilled. Reporters exchanged glances. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening around his gavel. She was no stranger to the law. Before politics, Crockett had been a defense attorney, dismantling weak cases and exposing biases in courtrooms not unlike this one. Her legal acumen was her armor, and she wielded it now with precision. "The contempt charge," she continued, "requires clear intent to disrupt judicial proceedings. My actions at the protest were protected speech, and this fine feels more like punishment for my identity than my conduct." The implication hung heavy. A black woman, young and outspoken, daring to challenge the system. Hargrove scoffed, his tone dripping with condescension. "Ms. Crockett, this isn't a law school seminar. You're here to answer for your actions, not lecture me." But Crockett wasn't cowed. She pressed on, citing case law. Cohen v. California, Texas versus Johnson, her voice rising with conviction. Each point landed like a dart, precise and unyielding. The gallery stirred, some nodding, others whispering about her audacity. Hargrove's face darkened. He wasn't used to defendants who fought back, especially not ones who knew the law better than most attorneys in his courtroom. The confrontation escalated as Crockett shifted her argument, zeroing in on Hargrove's pattern of rulings. "Your Honor, I've reviewed your cases. Defendants under 35, particularly people of color, face harsher penalties in this court. That's not justice, that's bias." The accusation was bold, a direct challenge to Hargrove's authority. Gasps rippled through the room. A prosecutor fidgeted, unsure whether to object. Hargrove slammed his gavel, his voice booming. "You're out of line, Ms. Crockett. One more word, and you'll be in a cell." But Crockett held her ground, her gaze unflinching. She knew the risk: jail, public backlash, a tarnished reputation, but she also knew the truth. The system wasn't just flawed, it was rigged. Her words weren't just for her defense. They were for every young defendant who'd faced Hargrove's gavel, for every voice silenced by a fine or a cell. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Would Hargrove double down, or would Crockett's defiance crack his facade? The answer would come, but not yet. Not today. The courtroom's silence was a living thing, heavy and suffocating, as Judge Hargrove's gavel hung in the air, its echo fading like a warning shot. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her eyes still, locked on the judge, unflinching despite the threat of a cell. Her accusation of bias had sliced through the room, and now every pair of eyes, reporters, spectators, even the bailiff, darted between her and Hargrove, waiting for the next move in this high-stakes chess game. The judge's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his knuckles white around the gavel's handle. Crockett's words had struck a nerve, and the tension was a wire stretched to snapping. Hargrove leaned forward, his voice low but venomous. "Ms. Crockett, you think you can waltz into my courtroom and accuse me of misconduct? You're treading on dangerous ground." His tone was a blade, meant to cut her down, to remind her of her place. But Crockett didn't waver. She tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but her eyes burning with resolve. "Your Honor," she said, her voice measured, "I'm not accusing you of anything the record doesn't already show. Your sentencing patterns are public. The numbers don't lie, even if you'd prefer they did." The gallery erupted in murmurs, a wave of shock and admiration rippling through the crowd. Reporters scribbled faster, their pens racing to capture every word. Crockett was no longer just a defendant. She was a prosecutor in her own right, turning the tables on Hargrove with surgical precision. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a neatly bound report, its pages marked with highlights. "I've compiled data from your last 5 years of rulings," she said, holding it up for the room to see. "Defendants under 35, especially Black and Latino, receive fines and sentences disproportionate to their charges. Care to explain that, Your Honor?" Hargrove's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the report as if it were a live grenade. He banged his gavel again, sharper this time. "This is not a debate, Ms. Crockett. You will sit down and accept your fine, or I'll hold you in contempt." But his voice cracked at the edges, betraying a flicker of unease. Crockett's evidence wasn't just a challenge. It was a spotlight on his career, and he knew it. The prosecutor, a wiry man named Ellis, finally stood, his voice hesitant. "Your Honor, perhaps we could recess to review the defendant's claims?" Hargrove shot Ellis a look that could have melted steel, but Crockett seized the opening. "A recess is a start," she said, her tone cool but commanding. "But let's be clear, this isn't just about my fine. This is about every defendant who's walked through these doors and left with a heavier burden because of their age or their skin. If you won't address it, I will." Her words were a gauntlet thrown at Hargrove's feet, and the room held, its breath, waiting for his response. Instead of answering, Hargrove stood, his robes billowing as he stormed toward his chambers. "Court is in recess," he barked, the door slamming behind him. The gallery exploded into chatter, reporters rushing to their phones, their voices overlapping in a frenzy. Crockett remained at the defendant's table, her report still in hand, her expression unreadable. She'd pushed Hargrove to the edge, but she knew this was only the beginning. The judge wasn't the type to back down. He'd come back swinging, and she needed to be ready. As the bailiff cleared the room, a young woman in the gallery, no older than 20, approached Crockett cautiously. "Ms. Crockett," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I was fined last year by Hargrove. It ruined me. You're right about him. Crockett's eyes softened, but her resolve hardened. Thank you for telling me, she said, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. This fight's for you too. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and slipped away as reporters swarmed Crockett, microphones thrusting toward her. Representative Crockett, are you alleging judicial misconduct? One shouted. Will you appeal the fine? Another demanded. Crockett raised a hand, silencing them. I'm not here to play games, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction. I'm here to demand fairness. If that means calling out bias, so be it. Her words were already spreading, snippets hitting social media. The hashtag #ShawJusticeForJasmine trending within minutes. But Crockett knew the real battle was still ahead. Back in his chambers, Hargrove paced, his mind racing. Crockett's report was a problem, one he couldn't dismiss. He'd underestimated her, assuming her political flair wouldn't translate to the courtroom. Now her accusations threatened to unravel years of rulings. He picked up his phone, dialing a colleague. We need to handle this, he muttered. She's not just a defendant, she's a damn crusader. The call ended, and Hargrove stared out his window, the Dallas skyline blurring before him. Crockett had lit a fuse, and the explosion was coming. The Dallas skyline gleamed outside Judge Hargrove's chambers, but inside, the air was stifling, charged with the weight of his growing unease. His call to a colleague, a senior judge with sway in the circuit, had been a desperate bid to contain the fallout from Jasmine Crockett's accusations. She's got data, he'd said, his voice tight. If the media runs with it, we're looking at an investigation. The colleague's response was curt. Neutralize her, Ronald. Double down, or you're finished. Hargrove set the phone down, his hands trembling. Crockett wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was a force, and the courtroom was about to become a battlefield. Back in the courtroom, the recess ended with a sharp rap of the bailiff's voice. Spectators poured in, their whispers a low hum, phones already recording in defiance of court rules. Crockett stood at the defendant's table, her report now a talisman, its pages fanned out before her. Her face was calm, but her pulse raced. She knew Hargrove would come back harder, his ego bruised, his career on the line. The door to the chambers swung open, and Hargrove strode in, his robes snapping with each step. His eyes locked onto Crockett, cold and predatory, as he took his seat. Ms. Crockett, he began, his voice a controlled growl. Your theatrics have disrupted this court long enough. Your fine stands, and I'm adding another $5,000 for your baseless accusations against this bench. The gallery gasped, the air sucked out of the room. $10,000 now, a punishment not just for her protest but for daring to challenge him. Reporters typed furiously, their feeds lighting up with the escalation. Hargrove leaned forward, his stare venomous. You will not turn my courtroom into a circus. Crockett's jaw tightened, but her voice was steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. Your Honor, this isn't a circus. It's a courtroom, where justice is supposed to prevail. Your fines don't intimidate me. They expose you. I move to recuse you from this case for clear bias. The room erupted, spectators murmuring, some clapping before the bailiff's glare silenced them. A recusal motion was a bold strike, one that could force Hargrove off the case if granted. It was also a public slap, questioning his integrity before a packed gallery. Hargrove's face flushed, his gavel slamming down. Denied, he roared. You have no grounds, Ms. Crockett. You're a defendant, not a prosecutor. But Crockett was ready, her legal training kicking in like muscle memory. Under Caperton v. Massey, Your Honor, a judge must recuse when their impartiality is reasonably questioned. Your sentencing patterns, your fines, your hostility, they all point to bias. I'm prepared to appeal this to the Fifth Circuit. Her voice was calm but unyielding, each word a brick in the wall she was building against him. The prosecutor, Ellis, stood, his voice shaky. Your Honor, The defense's motion lacks precedent in this context. But Crockett cut him off, her tone sharp. With respect, Mr. Ellis, the precedent is clear. I've cited it. The question is whether this court will follow it. The gallery buzzed, the energy electric. Hargrove's eyes darted to the reporters, their cameras catching every moment. He was cornered, his authority unraveling under Crockett's relentless pressure. "You're out of your depth, Ms. Crockett," Hargrove snapped, but his voice betrayed a crack of doubt. "This court will not be lectured by a politician playing lawyer." Crockett smiled faintly, unfazed. "I'm not playing, Your Honor. I'm defending the Constitution, something this court seems to have forgotten." The words landed like a thunderclap, and the room stilled, every eye on Hargrove. He gripped his gavel, his knuckles white, but didn't strike. For the first time, he looked uncertain, his control slipping. Outside, the story was exploding. Clips of Crockett's defiance flooded social media, her hashtag now trending globally. Activists gathered at the courthouse steps, their signs demanding justice for Jasmine and end judicial bias. Inside, Crockett felt the weight of their support, but also the danger. Hargrove wasn't done. He'd try to bury her, maybe, with jail time or a gag order. She glanced at the young woman from the gallery earlier, now seated in the back, her eyes wide with hope. Crockett's resolve hardened. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Hargrove cleared his throat, his voice, colder now, calculated. "Ms. Crockett, you want to talk fairness? Let's discuss your protest. Inciting a riot isn't justice, it's chaos. I could charge you with more than a fine." The threat hung heavy, a new escalation. Crockett's heart pounded, but her face gave nothing away. She knew he was baiting her, trying to provoke a misstep. The room watched, breathless, as the standoff teetered on a knife's edge. Would Crockett push back, or had Hargrove finally found a way to silence her? The Dallas courthouse was a pressure cooker, its walls vibrating with the weight of Judge Hargrove's threat to escalate charges against Jasmine Crockett. His words, accusing her of inciting a riot, hung in the air like a guillotine, poised to sever her defense and her future. Crockett stood at the defendant's table, her heart hammering but her face a mask of resolve. The gallery held its breath, reporters' fingers hovering over keyboards, ready to broadcast the next move in this electrifying standoff. Hargrove's eyes bored into her, daring her to falter, but Crockett had no intention of backing down. She'd lit a fuse, and now she'd see it burn to its end. "Your Honor," Crockett began, her voice clear and unwavering, "you can threaten me with charges, fines, or jail, but you can't rewrite the truth. My protest was about protecting democracy, not inciting chaos. You're not punishing me for a crime. You're punishing me for speaking out." The gallery stirred, murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd. Hargrove's gavel slammed down, but the sound was weaker now, less commanding. "Enough," he barked. "You will not lecture this court." But Crockett pressed on, her legal instincts razor sharp. "I'm not lecturing, Your Honor. I'm defending my rights and those of every defendant you've unfairly judged. If you want to talk riots, let's talk about the riot of injustice in this courtroom." The room erupted, spectators clapping, some shouting support. The bailiff moved to quiet them, but the energy was uncontainable. Hargrove's face was a storm cloud, his authority crumbling under Crockett's relentless assault. She held up her report again, its pages a silent indictment. "This data isn't just numbers. It's lives. Young people, people of color, fined and jailed at rates that defy fairness. You can silence me, but you can't silence the truth." Her words were a rallying cry, and the gallery roared, the sound shaking the room. Hargrove stood, his voice trembling with rage. "You're in contempt, Ms. Crockett. I'm ordering you detained." But before the bailiff could move, Prosecutor Ellis stood, his face pale. "Your Honor, I object. The defendant's motion for recusal has merit. We risk a mistrial if we..." Proceed. The betrayal stunned Hargrove, his eyes narrowing at Ellis. You're out of line, he snapped, but Ellis held his ground. The court's impartiality is in question, sir. We can't ignore it. The gallery buzzed, sensing a shift. Crockett's gambit had cracked the prosecution's unity. Seizing the moment, Crockett turned. To the gallery, her voice rising. This isn't just my fight. It's for everyone who's faced a gavel that weighs heavier because of who they are. We demand justice! The crowd surged to its feet, chanting her name. Hargrove pounded his gavel, but it was drowned out. Outside, the chants echoed, protesters at the courthouse steps amplifying the call. Social media exploded, clips of Crockett's stand going viral, her hashtag now a global movement. Hargrove, cornered, had no choice. Court is adjourned, he bellowed, fleeing to his chambers. But the damage was done. By evening, news outlets ran exposés on Hargrove's rulings, citing Crockett's report. The Texas Bar Association announced an investigation into his conduct, prompted by public outcry. Within days, Hargrove was suspended, his career in tatters. Crockett's fine was overturned on appeal. Her charges dropped as the protest case collapsed under scrutiny. The fallout was seismic. Crockett's stand sparked a broader reckoning, with lawmakers pushing for judicial reforms. By late 2025, Texas implemented mandatory bias training for judges and established oversight committees to review sentencing disparities. Crockett, now a national figure, testified before Congress, her voice shaping policies to ensure equity in courtrooms nationwide. The young woman from the gallery, inspired by Crockett, started a nonprofit to support defendants facing unfair fines, her life transformed by the fight she'd witnessed. In a quiet moment, Crockett stood outside the courthouse, the Dallas skyline glowing behind her. A reporter asked, "Was it worth the risk?" She smiled, her eyes fierce. "Every second. Justice isn't given. It's fought for." Her words became a mantra, etched into the movement she'd ignited. The system wasn't perfect, but Crockett had carved a path toward fairness, her legacy a testament to the power of standing firm against injustice.